Have you ever wondered why a single piece of paper can buy food in Tokyo, pay for oil in the Middle East, influence stock markets in London, and even affect the price of coffee in Brazil? It may look like an ordinary dollar bill, but behind it lies one of the greatest stories of power ever written. A story of war, politics, ambition, and global influence. Today, the United States dollar is used in almost every corner of the world. Governments hold it in their reserves, businesses trade with it, and millions of people trust it more than their own national currency. But this wasn't always the case. There was a time when the US dollar meant almost nothing outside America's borders. Other currencies dominated international trade, powerful empires controlled global markets, and the idea that one nation's money could become the world's financial backbone seemed impossible. So how did everything change? How did one currency rise above all others and become the most powerful financial tool in human history? The answer begins hundreds of years ago, long before the first dollar was ever printed. For thousands of years, civilizations relied on simple systems of trade. People exchanged grain for livestock, tools for clothing, and precious metals for valuable goods. Eventually, gold and silver became the preferred forms of money because they were rare, durable, and trusted across different cultures. Wealth was measured by the amount of precious metal a nation possessed. As kingdoms expanded and international trade grew, carrying bags filled with gold became risky and impractical. Banks began issuing paper notes that represented the gold stored safely in their vaults. These notes could be exchanged for real gold at any time, creating trust between governments, merchants, and ordinary people. Centuries later, after gaining independence, the United States introduced its own national currency. The US dollar was officially established in 1792. At first, it was simply another currency among many others. Britain's pound sterling dominated global trade, supported by the British Empire, whose influence stretched across continents. For decades, Britain remained the world's financial center. Ships carrying goods across oceans were financed through London, international businesses trusted British banks, and the pound became the preferred currency for global commerce. Meanwhile, the United States was still developing. It had vast natural resources, growing industries, and an expanding population, but it had not yet become the world's economic leader. Everything changed during the 20th century. The First World War transformed global economics. European nations spent enormous amounts of money fighting the conflict. Governments borrowed heavily, industries shifted toward military production, and national debts reached unprecedented levels. While much of Europe was devastated by war, the United States experienced rapid industrial growth. American factories produced weapons, vehicles, machinery, food, and supplies for allied nations. Gold flowed into American banks as countries purchased essential goods. When the war finally ended, the United States possessed one of the strongest economies on Earth. But history had another surprise waiting. In 1929, financial markets collapsed. The Great Depression spread across the world, destroying businesses, wiping out savings, and leaving millions unemployed. It became one of the darkest economic disasters in modern history. Governments searched desperately for solutions, but recovery was slow. Then, before the world could fully recover, another catastrophe arrived. The Second World War changed everything once again. Entire cities across Europe and Asia were destroyed. Industries collapsed, infrastructure disappeared, and economies were left in ruins. Yet one country emerged stronger than almost anyone expected. The United States. Unlike many nations, America's mainland industries remained largely untouched by the fighting. Its factories operated at enormous capacity, producing aircraft, tanks, ships, weapons, and supplies on a scale the world had never seen before. By the end of the war, the United States held an extraordinary amount of the world's gold reserves. Its economy had become the largest and most productive on the planet. Leaders around the world faced an enormous challenge. Global trade needed stability. Countries needed a currency they could trust. Businesses needed confidence that international payments would remain secure. Without a reliable financial system, rebuilding the world would be nearly impossible. In 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, for one of the most important financial meetings in history. Their goal was simple but incredibly ambitious. They wanted to create a system that would prevent another global economic collapse and encourage international cooperation. The agreement they reached would change the future forever. Instead of every country relying solely on gold, the US dollar would become the center of the new global financial system. The United States promised that foreign governments could exchange dollars for gold at a fixed price. Because America held such massive gold reserves, the promise seemed reliable. Countries accepted the agreement. Central banks began holding dollars. International trade increasingly relied on the American currency. The dollar was no longer just America's money. It was becoming the world's money. And over the next few decades, that decision would reshape global finance in ways almost nobody could have imagined. And over the next few decades, that decision would reshape global finance in ways almost nobody could have imagined. As international trade expanded, countries around the world began buying and selling goods using US dollars. Oil, one of the world's most valuable resources, was increasingly priced in dollars. From automobiles and electronics to wheat and steel, countless international transactions depended on the same currency. The more the dollar was used, the stronger its position became. Governments started storing billions of dollars in their central banks as foreign exchange reserves. Businesses borrowed in dollars. Investors trusted American financial markets, and international banks relied on the stability of the U.S. economy. But there was one problem. The Bretton Woods system depended on a simple promise. Every dollar held by foreign governments could be exchanged for gold. As the global economy expanded, more and more dollars were printed to support trade and economic growth. Eventually, there were far more dollars circulating around the world than the amount of gold the United States actually possessed. Some countries became concerned. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, governments began exchanging their dollars for American gold. Gold reserves started leaving the United States at an alarming rate. If this continued, the entire financial system could collapse. Then, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon made one of the most important financial decisions in modern history. He announced that the United States would no longer allow foreign governments to exchange dollars for gold. The world was shocked. The direct link between the dollar and gold had officially ended. Many experts believed the dollar would lose its global dominance almost immediately. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. The dollar remained the world's leading currency. Why? Because trust had replaced gold. The United States had the world's largest economy, the deepest financial markets, political influence, military strength, and institutions that investors believed were relatively stable. Around the world, businesses and governments continued accepting dollars because everyone else was doing the same. Economists often describe this as a network effect. The more people use a currency, the more valuable and useful it becomes. Then another major development strengthened the dollar even further. During the 1970s, international oil trade became heavily linked to the US dollar. Since every nation needed oil, countries first needed dollars to buy it. This created constant global demand for the American currency. Whether a country was in Asia, Europe, Africa, or South America, importing energy often meant holding US dollars. As global trade accelerated, American financial markets also expanded. Wall Street became one of the most powerful financial centers in history. International companies raised capital in the United States. Investors purchased U.S. Treasury bonds because they were considered among the safest investments available. Even during global financial crises, money often flowed into the dollar instead of away from it. This surprised many people. Whenever uncertainty increased, investors searched for stability, and in many cases, they found it in the US dollar. Today, the dollar is involved in a large share of international trade, global banking, and foreign exchange reserves. Airlines purchase fuel with it, governments repay international debt in it, multinational companies calculate profits using it, even people living in countries with unstable currencies sometimes choose to save their money in US dollars to protect their purchasing power. But no currency remains dominant forever. Throughout history, powerful empires have risen and fallen. The Roman Empire declined. The British Empire eventually lost its global dominance. Many economists now ask the same question. Could the dollar one day face the same fate? Some countries are increasing trade in their own currencies. Digital payment systems continue evolving. Central banks are exploring digital currencies, and new economic powers continue growing. Although the dollar remains the world's most influential currency today, the future is impossible to predict. History has repeatedly shown that economic power constantly changes. The next chapter of global finance may already be unfolding. One thing, however, is certain. The story of the US dollar is not simply the story of money. It is the story of trust, influence, innovation, conflict, and the decisions that reshaped the modern world. Every dollar bill carries far more than financial value. It carries centuries of history. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this. The world's most powerful currency was never built on paper alone. It was built on confidence. And as long as the world continues to believe in that confidence, the dollar's remarkable story will continue to shape the future of the global economy.